everyone, so in today's video I'm going to be going over some common signs and symptoms that your betta fish might be sick. Now even though I said this video is about betta fish, there are a great deal of these that can be applied to any tropical fish as well. First, I'm going to be talking about some symptoms that are kind of like definite to one of the types of illnesses your fish could have, and then I'm also going to talk about just certain signs that could mean illness or could mean something else. And this will make a little bit more sense when we get into the video. Now, another thing that I want to address is that not all illnesses are a sign of bad husbandry. Just because your fish gets an illness, it does not necessarily mean that it is your fault and you shouldn't automatically blame yourself for it. There are various ways that a fish can get an illness. It could be something that a fish is more prone to getting just due to bad genetics, and it has nothing to do with you. It may also come in on live or frozen food that you feed your fish. It could also come in on a plant that you brought in the store. And the last thing is stress can make a fish susceptible to illness, and that is something that can happen to any fish at any time for whatever reason. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to write down the 3 types of main illnesses that your fish could have. Now the first one is a bacterial infection. The second one that your fish could also get is a fungal infection. And the last thing that your fish could possibly get is a parasite. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is the kind of like physical appearance of some of these illnesses. So the things that you can look at and you can see without watching the behavior of your fish. So we'll get to behavior later, but we're going to be talking about appearance first. So the first thing that I'm going to start off with is explaining the appearance of parasites. The symptoms of a fish with parasites is pretty much exclusive to a fish with parasites. So a lot of the symptoms that you will see don't really mean anything else. So they're the easiest to identify. So that's why we're going to start with that one. So the first sign, and this is a symptom of a very common parasite called ick, is little white dots on the body. Basically what this will look like is almost as if someone poured a little bit of table salt onto your fish. So they'll just be like little fine grains all over your fish. Now this one is very, very common. If you have talked to any fish keeper, a lot of times they will say that you've had at least one fish that has had ick. Now the next most common sign of a parasite that I'm going to talk about, this is a very short list, and that is white feces. Basically, when your fish waste is either very white, very long, skinny, sometimes it can even be almost like a milky, like translucent color. Basically, that is a worm. Those are internal worms, an internal parasite that is in your fish, and your fish is passing them through its feces. So that is why it gives it the white appearance. Now the next thing I'm going to address is fungal. Fungal infections are the second most easy thing to kind of identify. A lot of times you can really notice fungal infections because a lot of times it is something growing on your fish. It is something that's very easy to spot. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about with fungal infections is growths. Now to elaborate on this, there are times where your fish will get almost like a fuzzy appearance. Sometimes it'll grow on its fins, sometimes it'll grow on its body, and this growth is a fungus. Now the next thing that I'm going to touch on is dull colors. Now to elaborate on dull colors, I don't mean like the color kind of fades, like when your fish is stressed, you bring it home from the store and its colors aren't as defined. I'm talking about as if there's like a grayish fog over the color of your fish. It's kind of like there's something blocking the color of your fish. So it's not this that it lost its color, it's that something is blocking it. And once again, this can be growths, or this could actually be a film-like substance. Your fish has a film, it will then result in the dull colors. These film can also make the eyes appear kind of glassy, or they can fog over. And now to finish off the appearance of a sick betta fish is we're going to be touching on bacterial. Now this one is the hardest one to identify because bacterial infections can sometimes look very similar to just signs of stress. So the first one that I'm going to touch on, and this is going to be a very obvious one, and it is known as pop eye, which basically means that the eye pops out. Now, basically what happens is there's something behind the eye that is like pushing the eye out. And a lot of times it is swelling of some kind that's popping the eye out. So that is generally a sign of a bacterial infection. Now, another sign of a bacterial infection, which is very common to something called dropsy, which I do have a whole video on already. It is a very ugly disease that has actually taken quite a few of my fish. And the number one symptom of that is pine coning scales. Your fish will almost take an appearance of a pine cone. It'll swell out, the scales will kind of pop out, give it that bumpy appearance that you'll see on a pine cone. Now, the next common bacterial infection that I'm going to talk about is going to be something like tumors, abscesses, stuff like that. A lot of times, a bacterial infection, the fish will end up getting like big lumps on their body. Sometimes these can actually look very agitated, very red. Sometimes can almost look like they're bleeding. A lot of times it also doesn't have a very good prognosis, unfortunately. I'm just gonna write down bumps, simply because it could be an abscess or it could be a tumor. So I'm just gonna write down bumps. Now, to elaborate on this even further, a lot of times these things will not pop up overnight. A lot of times it might be something that is slowly adding on and you just don't notice it until a certain day and you think it came out of nowhere. But big tumors that are on your fish that can grow anywhere on their body generally do not happen overnight. Now, the last thing that I'm going to touch on that is unique to bacterial infections, and that is something called fin rot or fin melt. It is often characterized by very dark fins or very rough-looking fins. Sometimes fish, their fins can melt away in what seems like overnight, and sometimes it's a very, very slow process. Once your fish loses all their fins, it can start to actually attack their body as well, but it always starts on the fins. It's something that is definitely easily spotted. So now that we have the appearance of certain things out of the way, I'm going to talk about behavioral changes that you may notice when you are looking at these things. And I'm going to use a different color whiteboard marker for that so you can clearly tell the difference. I'm going to start with the parasite because it does affect the behavior of the fish the most. So the first thing is your fish is going to do what is known as flashing. Okay, this marker is a no. The cap wasn't on very well, so I think I just ruined this marker. Red will work. So, flashing. In fish language, flashing is when your fish is like rapidly rubbing along ornaments, plants, the tank, substrate, everything like that, almost as if it's trying to scratch itself. It is basically a fancy word for scratching. A lot of times your fish will do this because, especially with ick, which is the white dots on body, your fish is going to be very itchy. Now, fungal infections generally don't have a lot of behavioral changes that are specific only to fungal infections. And bacterial infections don't really either. The biggest one, though, that is most often a bacterial infection is just like kind of like uneven swimming. This could almost mean that your fish is swimming kind of like sideways, like maybe like tilted. It could be swimming like kind of downward, or it could be kind of like stuck up. So it could be any way, but usually this is often as a result of a lot of the bloating and swelling that comes with bacterial infections. So now that we've touched on the behavioral changes, I'm going to get into certain things that could mean any of these illnesses, but it could also be a sign of something that is not a sickness. So I'm going to get into those right now. So the first one that I'm going to say is something that I pretty much just mentioned, and that is bloating. And basically it can be a result of eating too fast, it could be a result of eating too much, or it could be a result of a bacterial infection. Like a lot of swelling can make it look like it's bloated as well. So it could be a food issue, or it could be an infection. So if you see this, don't panic right away, but it is something to just keep an eye on. Another thing that I'm going to mention, and this is something that could mean a parasite, or it could just mean a happy or stressed out fish, and that is erratic swimming. Basically, erratic swimming is just they're swimming all over the place, up, down, side, side. They're like all over the place, kind of like they're super, super hyper. This can kind of like accompany the flashing, kind of like, oh, they're all crazy because they're just like, oh, I'm so itchy, I can't sit still. Or they could just be really, really hyper or really, really stressed. Now, the next thing that I'm going to touch on is clamped fins. Now, clamped fins can actually mean quite a lot of things. It can mean your fish is stressed. It could mean your fish is cold. Maybe your parameters are slightly off. If your fish is sick, a lot of times they'll clamp their fins as well. So it could mean literally any one of those three categories, or it could just be maybe your temperature is slightly off. Basically, anytime your fish is slightly uncomfortable, it's going to clamp its fins. Now, the second last thing that I'm going to mention is lethargy. Lethargy is just a fancy word for inactive. If your fish is just hovering in the corner, if your fish is just hovering on the bottom, maybe hiding in the hide and never comes out, your fish is what is known as lethargic. Now, this, once again, could be a sign of an infection. A sick fish is going to not have a lot of energy to swim, not really want to swim. They might also be doing it, once again, if the parameters are slightly off, if the temperature is slightly off, or they could just be doing it just one day because they feel like it. Definitely something to not be alerted by right away, but if it happens for an extended period of time, to start kind of taking note of it. Now, the last thing that I'm going to mention is rapid breathing. Once again, this could be a sign of discomfort due to an illness, or it could be that maybe they just got chased, maybe they're stressed, or once again, maybe the water's too hot or something. Now, all of these things, singular, are not really something to be alarmed by. The only reason you should really be alarmed by these is if they're happening for weeks at a time, or if you have multiple of these at the same time. Any drastic changes in your fish's behavior should definitely be kind of taken note of, kept an eye on. If something they've never done before, they're now suddenly doing, it is definitely something that you should take note of. So I hope you found this video educational and kind of learned a little bit about some common fish illnesses and the appearance and behavioral changes that your fish might have and that you should watch out for when you're analyzing the health of your fish. If you have anything else you want to add about illnesses, put that in the comments down below so other fish keepers can see them. But that is all I have for today, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye, guys.
Every day I'm looking for a way to return to the time when everything was easy to learn. Don't know when it started to get so serious, building up an illusion of a world full of trust, moving on when everything's gone. It's hard to be strong.